So we recently got the new critless mods, and a few of you have been wondering what Viessa should look like on a build view, and whether she even stands to gain anything from the new critless stuff, as she has a 15% crit rate, so surely crit is best, right? Mostly, yes. But in the end, it doesn't really matter, guys, because after building her out, I gotta say. And maybe I'm still a little jaded after having wasted 12 catalysts on Jayber for the last build video, but I am pretty fucking disappointed with her. And she's down there next to Jayber in terms of how sad she is to play right now, and I'll preface this entire video with my opinion that, until they rework her, she is not worth crafting or investing in at all. I'm gonna try and make this quick though, so to start I'll break down how all her abilities work, briefly discuss her Transcendent mods, and then give you 2 quick builds for Bossing and Mobbing if you are a Viessa fetishist and insist on using her despite the many warnings I will have given not to do so. Viessa's passive bonus effect applies to everything, but basically all her skills are going to apply an ice effect. The effect itself can change depending on what Transcendent mods you have equipped, and at base the ice effect is called Ice Shackle, which slows the target's action speed and can even apply to commanders and colossi, which is pretty nice. Moving on though, Viessa's first ability is Frost Shards. A very simple skill, just launches an ice projectile that deals damage in an AoE on impact after traveling far enough. The description is going to be misleading because it makes it seem like there are 2 instances of damage. If we had to nitpick what it is actually saying, it just means that the impact damage is dealt only to the target hit, and the burst damage is dealt in an AoE to all targets but the target hit. Kind of like Haley's AoE beam, but since on Viessa both instances of damage deal the exact same amount of damage, there's legitimately no point in even trying to differentiate between the 2, so don't get hung up on the description there. The second ability is Frost Road, which is a buffing ability that gives you more move speed, regenerates part of your shield just one time when you cast it. It's not a continuous regen like Freyna or Enzo, else Viessa would have a much larger appeal, I think, and then makes it so everywhere you walk leaves an ice trail that applies the current ice effects to enemies that cross over the trail. This ability also has a pretty cool Transcendent mod called Cold-Bloodedness that makes it so you no longer leave an ice trail or get more move speed or shield regen, but instead, for the entire duration of the buff, you get a 5% skill power optimization bonus, which is the same bonus as your Reactor weapon condition, a 20% decrease in skill cost, and then a 20% decrease in skill cooldowns, which is honestly an insanely strong buff, but it's just a huge fucking shame, since even as a skill-focused character, she still falls behind Jayber on total DPS or damage potential. The only reason Jayber is worse than her is Jayber is way more mechanically worse off, but damage-wise he beats her in almost every possible way right now. The third ability is Cold Snap, which is an extremely useful AoE mob clearing ability that projects an AoE in front of you, dealing a decent amount of damage, but that's it. This ability also has a Transcendent mod called Cold Snap Watch, which modifies the base damage of the ability to be about 30% of what it normally is, but makes it so it leaves behind a field of ice that deals continuous damage. In terms of semi-AFK or stationary farming potential, it's not a bad ability, but if that's all you want, then you're better off just running the 4th ability instead, which is Blizzard. And this makes it so, focused around a point of your choosing, you create an AoE that deals continuous damage every 2 seconds, and then once the duration expires, it deals an extra bit of damage in a larger range for slightly more damage, but just one time. This is a super weird ability though, as unlike most abilities, the continuous damage interval is not determined by the ability itself. Rather, it depends solely on the enemy and when they last entered the zone. This might be confusing, but to explain, let's talk about the Vesper's XP farm and why she is so good at it. As you just saw on the screen, it killed all the enemies that spawned, even though some spawned well before another 2-second interval had passed, but after the first damage instance had occurred. And that's obviously not working how you'd think it would, right? Normally, an AoE ability like this keeps track of its own interval, so it doesn't matter if enemies spawn in between the interval of 2 seconds, the skill would still wait until the next interval to deal the damage to the enemy. The reason why it's so good at the Vesper's XP farm is because the ability damage does not wait until the next interval. If a new enemy enters the zone between the interval, it deals damage immediately, and that enemy who just entered the zone now has a different interval start point than all the other enemies in that zone. This may sound ridiculous, and frankly it is, but if they ever make it so Blizzard stops dealing damage instantaneously to and tracking enemies on an individual level, and I suspect they will make that change eventually, then Viessa will pretty much lose the only thing she is decent at. The ability also has a Transcendent mod called Glacial Cloud, and all that does is make it so you get a 10-second shorter cooldown, whoopee, and instead of aiming at the point you want the blizzard to spawn, you toss an orb that determines where it will spawn instead. This is likely the dumbest Transcendent mod I've ever seen in the history of Transcendent mods. Never use it. This whole ability also has an issue where sometimes the amount of continuous damage ticks is going to fall 1 tick short and lose 1 instance of damage. The reasoning for this I'm not entirely certain of. There is actually an extremely similar issue in the game Remnant 2, which also uses Unreal Engine 5.2 for its core, where some some AoE continuous effects function very similarly and also lose 1 tick of damage for no reason out of the blue. Our best guess is that it relates to how the game engine handles start times on a system level with your device, but just know that sometimes you are going to lose 1 instance of damage because the cosmic gods willed it. Her passive just makes it so after meeting the ice effect levels required on enemies under conditions that will vary between your Transcendent mod, you spawn a little buddy orb that follows you until it finds an enemy to shoot itself at. At base, it just needs an ice shackle level minimum of 2 before it spawns one. The passive also has 2 Transcendent mods that modify the ice effect applied by all abilities, and the first is called Hypothermia. Instead of Ice Shackle, your abilities apply Ice Needle, which deals continuous damage over time at a 0.5 second interval. It's not a half bad ability, but it tends to be beaten out by other options depending on how you use her. If you're doing boss fights, Absolute Zero and Cold-Blooded are better. If you're doing farming, Cold-Blooded is still better. It's just not as great as you might think, even with its fast damage interval. The other Transcendent mod is Absolute Zero. This turns all of your abilities into singular abilities instead of fusion or tech, and then it removes the standard ice effects and makes it so if any part of your ability damage ever crits on an enemy, then it will freeze them with the Frostbite effect. The huge problem with this though is that Frostbite cannot apply to Colossi or Commander level enemies, so the ice effect on Absolute Zero is worthless in most cases. As such, the only real benefit offered by Absolute Zero is that it modifies the base skill power modifiers to be higher than they normally are. Both Hypothermia and Absolute Zero modify the base power modifiers of each skill, by the way, but Absolute Zero also modifies the Frost Road skill to deal damage over time to any enemies standing on the ice effect left over. It does that since, with no more regular ice effect, Frost Road would do nothing to enemies and has no chance to crit on them. So unless they make it do damage, like they do, then Frost Road would actually be defunct. That said, I can't find a reason to not just run Cold-Bloodedness on mobbing or on boss fights. A skill-focused Viessa without using guns is never going to one-phase a boss without fishing for crits and trying to get lucky on animations that keep the boss completely still. Because Blizzard has a tiny-ass range and the odds of an enemy staying within it are slim to none, so you're rarely going to get off the ending burst damage or the majority of your continuous ticks unless the boss holds completely still. If you try to run Absolute Zero in a dungeon like some people are going to tell you is best, you're going to be stuck with longer cooldowns than you would like, and in a 400% dungeon in particular, you're going to find yourself body blocked more often than not, and would be better served by having Cold Snap, your primary mob clearing ability, on a shorter cooldown with Cold-Bloodedness instead of trying to make Ice Road work. In the end, Blizzard is only good for dungeon bosses to make them move slower and shoot at you less, and her regular skills aren't going to be doing much for you in boss fights and are better suited to dungeons. However, at that point, just take an unmodded bunny and you'll do a better job in dungeons than Viessa will right now. An argument that some will have to use Absolute Zero on boss fights is that you can use your guns between skill casts, but in the end, just use Haley if you're going to use a gun and you'll be infinitely better served that way. The reason I'm so fucking disappointed in her is that she is just barely good enough to not be called complete shit, but she is so bad that you cannot seriously call her good at anything either. She's also in a super weird state with her Transcendent mods where it feels like they're trying to build 3 different characters and just compromised and threw it all into one person. And yeah, some people are going to pop out and insist that she is usable, and guys, she is usable in the same sense that a spoon is usable when trying to eat pizza. And while it might be fun and quirky to eat your pizza with a spoon, and you might insist to your friends that are down in the comments to me that it's a skill issue, and that I'm simply not used to the learning curve of eating a pizza with a spoon. But guys, why the fuck are you trying to eat a pizza with a spoon? Are you not better served just picking up the damn thing with your hands and eating it like a normal human being? Are you not better off running literally any other character and having a much better experience in any activity you do? That might be a ridiculous example, but when I talked about Jayber, I got a lot of Jayber defenders trying to argue some of these things to me last time, and I know Viessa is infinitely more popular, and will absolutely have people trying to justify their investment in her, and guys, she is just not it. The only reason she gets to be better than Jayber is because mechanically, she's way better off than he is. She is less clunky, way more fluid, and has far fewer issues, but that still does not make her worthwhile, so do not try to tell me that she is without a rework. Haley, in a single shot from Zenith, gets to do more than Viessa's entire kit of abilities, multiplied several times over, and Haley gets up to 11 of those shots with virtually no cooldown. That said, for the weird people out there who will insist she is worth using for whatever bullshit context they make up as not being outclassed by another character, I forgive you. And let's talk about 2 quick builds for her, starting with bossing. For survivability, we have increased HP. If you absolutely need more, you can swap out skill expansion, but do so at your own peril, as the range here is pretty much mandatory if you ever hope to have your Blizzard hit the boss even once during the entire span of the fight. For skill cooldowns, we have MP conversion, nimble fingers, the cooldown bonus from Cold-Blooded, and then a little bit of cooldown provided by Focus on Chill. We obviously have Focus on Chill here for our chill power ratios, and someone is probably going to suggest swapping it out for Chill Specialist, but do not do that. The difference in cooldown offered here is absolutely a better DPS increase, despite not being a total damage gain per skill cast. Cold-Blooded builds are all about the skill spam, which means we care way more about the averaged DPS with your cooldowns involved than we do about the total damage per skill cast. Given that, we also need things to cost less, and we need them to cost a lot less. So we bring Maximize Conservation, and paired with the 20% cost reduction from Cold-Blooded, that's pretty good, but it's still not enough. So for once, on our components, we are not going to bring the Slayer set. Instead, we're going to bring the Polar Knight set, and this way we can sidestep the cost penalty enacted by Slayer. Polar Knight makes it so you gain a tiny bit of chill power ratio, and then when inflicting frostbite on enemies, you have a chance to gain a stack that increases your crit damage for skills and weapons, with a secondary effect that when something with frostbite is killed, they'll explode in a mini AoE. Not mentioned here is that frostbite does not mean the frostbite effect specifically. It actually just means any ice effect you can apply from any source, and that includes the ice shackle effect that we can apply with every single ability. Is Polar Knight going to beat out Slayer in terms of total damage? Fuck no. And if you don't understand why that is already, please go watch my video on reactors and skill power to better understand why Slayer is, in most cases, unbeatable as a component set. However, in this context, where you are either spamming skills or completely useless, it is better to build into complete skill spam if you're going to use her. Otherwise, you should never use her. That's the whole point of this video. Slayer can work, yeah, but in terms of sustained skill spam, you're going to be hurting later if you do. For the roles, it's pretty much the same as always with the ideal roles listed on screen here, but the most important role is going to be the max MP roll on your sensor. You want it as high as you can get it. For your reactor, you're going to want a Chill Tech reactor with subs as Colossus skill attack and attack power ratio. Your Blizzard is the majority of your damage in an ideal scenario, and there's no reason not to build into it with your reactor. However, if you get a cooldown sub instead of a tech ratio boost, that's fine too, and you can swap out Focus on Chill for Chill Specialist instead in such a case. Cost is also an okay roll if you end up using a fusion reactor instead. That's not a complete waste either. She sucks bad enough right now that most options are going to be acceptable, as when compared to something like Lepic where the reactor rolls can literally determine whether you get a boss kill or not. Viessa never has that threshold. She's never getting the kill anyways without using guns, and for like the third time in this video, if you're gonna use guns, don't bring Viessa. Speaking of guns though, the elephant in the room is Frostwatcher, the new weapon from Deathstalker that can give you more chill skill power and lower enemy chill resistance. But not even that can save Viessa from herself. Yeah, if you have it, use it. There's nothing wrong with that. And an alternative, and this is almost a joke, but I am serious, because if you're serious about a skill spam Viessa, then sure, it is an option. But Blue Beetle. It'll give you increased crit rate every time you cast a fusion skill, and since her 1 and 3 are both fusion skills on super low cooldowns, you're pretty much always going to have that buff up. That said, that buff is tiny as shit, and if you really care about the weapon that much, just close this video and do not use Viessa. For mobbing, we're still bringing Cold-Blooded and cooldown mods the same as before, but this time we're bringing power increase instead of Focus on Chill, along with chill amplification on power ratios. Skill expansion and amplification control are there for your range. Amplification instead of maximize range, as Viessa's range cap is 250 on her abilities, not 300, so maximize range would be a waste here, and you may as well get more shield. When it comes to mobbing, we really don't need to build into cost too hard, as you're going to be picking up drops, and we also have MP Collector to ease our MP suffering. And then the last two mods are going to be flex slots. Bring whatever you want. You want more HP, cost reduction, duration, anything, just put it there for whatever suits your context. My personal preferences on those slots are going to be more HP and probably some defense with Spear and Shield for a hair more damage as well. But it is not that important here. Components for mobbing. The rolls are going to be identical, but this time it's just going to boil down to your preference. Polar Knight will still trigger the AoE death on enemies afflicted by Ice Shackle, which will be all of them since we apply it on every hit with every skill, and it isn't half bad. However, Slayer here is still a good usable choice, but you may want to look into a cost mod on one of your flex slots if you end up taking it for mobbing. And then guys, that's it. I do not like Viessa, and I hope that message came across crystal clear in this video.